Welcome back to Afternoon Tea. It's good to have you join me again this afternoon as we pick up Psalm 119 in verse 73 through to 80. Now, I really wanted to look at this one, even though I'd forgot to include it last week, which is why we're jumping back to it now after yesterday. But I think it's a really important stanza. I think if I had to give it a title, I might call it The Power of Fellowship in Suffering. And hopefully you'll see why in just a minute. As you read through this stanza, you're going to pick up some reoccurring themes, some ideas that the psalmist has already introduced to us and explored at some length. So for instance, you'll see verse 75 and verse 78. I know, Lord, that your laws are righteous and that in faithfulness you have afflicted me. So he understands that he's suffering, and even suffering under the hand of God. And then in verse 78, may the arrogant be put to shame for wronging me without cause. So he's got people who are standing against him, who are behind his hardship, and he's asking God to bring justice into that situation. Now, it's a little early for a sidetrack, I realise, but I couldn't help it. In verse 78, there's something there that struck me that I hadn't seen before in the psalm and hadn't really picked up on. Verse 78, may the arrogant be put to shame for wronging me without cause, but I will meditate on your precepts. It's really interesting to look at where his mind goes when he's under attack and when he's being wronged. When people are running him down and probably dragging his name through the dirt, maybe they're gossiping, speaking behind his back, accusing him of things he hasn't done. Where does his mind go? Well, where does your mind go when people are giving you a hard time like that? I can tell you where my mind goes. I have imaginary conversations with people in my head, and I give fantastic speeches, and I'm always the winner, and I'm always vindicated, and people are always patting me on the back. So I don't know about you, but have a look at the psalmist. The psalmist's mind, he doesn't fixate on their offences against him, but rather he meditates on God and God's word. Now that's an incredibly hard thing to do, and it's really quite a big game changer, is that when your mind is so distracted by suffering and pain, to be able to realise, to not fixate on their offence against you, but to consider, ponder, meditate, reflect on God and his word to you in that moment. Well, that is a brilliant little snapshot of how we should be when we feel under attack from others. So many little golden nuggets scattered throughout this psalm, even if they're not the main focus of every stanza. It's worth pausing on every verse because otherwise you're going to miss out on these little gems. But what I noticed about this stanza for today is there's a unique element here. There's something that the psalmist introduces in these verses that we haven't come across yet in the psalm to date. And that is that we meet his fellow believers. It's almost as if we're introduced to his Christian brothers and sisters, in our context, the ones he churches with. Now have a look, you'll see it there in verse 74. He says, I know, Lord, that your laws are righteous. 74, that was 75. May those who fear you rejoice when they see me. May those who fear you rejoice when they see me. My fellow believers, my brothers and sisters, when they see me suffering, his prayer to God is that his example in that moment would be an encouragement to his Christian friends. And then again, you'll see it in verse 79. May those who fear you turn to me. You see, again, he's asking that his suffering would not be wasted and that beyond his own sanctification, this would be something that would be a huge help to those around him. If you're facing suffering alone, you're toast. It's really, really hard. And standing alone in hardship is always going to be an added burden on top of whatever it is you're suffering. But if you can face it with your brothers and sisters, then you're going to get the confident tone that comes through in this stanza. That experience can be yours. And it really made me reflect, I guess, on two things. Verse 80, he says he doesn't give up because he knows how that would be a discouragement to others. May I wholeheartedly follow your decrees so that I wouldn't be put to shame. And verse 79, he's previously just said, may those who fear you turn to me. So he doesn't want to give up because he knows that other people are watching and looking at his example in his hardship. Don't now underestimate the difference that you can make. Don't underestimate the encouragement that you can be in your suffering. Often when we feel like our back is against the wall, we think that we're the ones that need the help. And we do, but don't be ignorant of the fact that even in your hardship, you will be giving help to someone else. They may only come back to you a week, a month, a year in the future and say, you know what, when you were going through that thing, I was blown away at your perseverance. And I just want to say it's been a real encouragement to me now that I'm going through something similar myself. Those kind of stories happen all the time. It was the psalmist's experience, and wouldn't it be great if it could be your experience too? And then have a look, the second thing that really the penny dropped for me in reading this stanza is that when I see another Christian persevering through their suffering, it gives me strength and encourages me. All right? And that is his hope for his Christian friends as he is writing these words. But hopefully you can realize that it can be true for you and me as well. When I see someone struggling as a Christian through a really hard time, it really encourages me to keep on going myself. Now, sometimes there are stories with happy endings. I've known folks who have been unable to fall pregnant and have prayed long and hard for that. And after a really rough, long road, God has answered their prayer by allowing them to have a baby. And that kind of perseverance through hardship has been a real encouragement to me when I see God answering a prayer like that. But I've got to be honest, the perseverance that encourages me even more is when people hang on to God through a hardship and yet he doesn't give them the answer they want. I've also known folks who have struggled to conceive, been faithful and asked God to intervene, and God has answered that prayer by saying no. And yet they maintain their faith in him and their love for him, even though there is a deep sadness in that answered prayer. And to see my friends persevere even through those moments, wow, that humbles me. It brings me such strength and encouragement. And I wonder if there isn't maybe something in that for you, an example that you've seen to be encouraged by, or an example that you could be to others. But either way, I was thinking as I was finishing reading this stanza, and it took me through to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 3. These words are echoed in my ears. Hebrews 12, verse 3 asks us to consider him who endured such opposition from sinners so that you would not grow weary and lose heart. Now you could take those words and take them right back to the psalm. They could apply to the psalmist. But of course in Hebrews chapter 12, it applies to Jesus. He is the one who has undergone so much suffering at the hands of sinners, and yet we consider him and his example and his forgiveness and his perseverance so that we don't grow weary and lose heart. Well, friends, as you're reflecting on those words from our psalm this afternoon, you might want to also get ready, be prepared as you read ahead for the next part that we will read together. It's going to be very familiar. Even if you don't know Psalm 119, you're going to know this part. I want you to read verses 105 through to verse 112. And we'll be back together tomorrow afternoon. See you then.